I obtained most of the information you are about to view in this video from brothers Leeland Jones and Daniel James. They are Holy Spirit anointed watchmen of the Most High God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. They are also modest, selfless, loving, and lovers of the truth. Support these watchmen of God by subscribing to their channels and praying for them. I'll post the links to their YouTube channels in the description section of this video. Scriptures considered relevant in this video. Daniel 9, verse 27. And he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week. And in the midst of the week he shall cause the sacrifice and the oblation to cease, and for the overspreading of abominations he shall make it desolate, even until the consummation. And that determined shall be poured upon the desolate. Please understand that Trump already confirmed the Abraham Accords peace covenant between America, Israel, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Morocco, and Sudan. It does not state in the Bible that Palestine has to sign the son of perdition's false peace covenant. Should Trump win the 2024 American federal election, he could get more countries to sign the Abraham Accords, maybe even Palestine. Palestine having to sign the son of perdition's covenant with many nations isn't a biblical requirement. Isaiah 28, verse 15. Because ye have said, we have made a covenant with death, and with hell are we at agreement. When the overflowing scourge shall pass through, it shall not come unto us, for we have made lies our refuge, and under falsehood have we hid ourselves. This passage has to do with the son of perdition, Donald John Trump's false covenant, the Abraham Accords, which he negotiated during the Beer 19 plague, and the mark of the beast dragon juice shots that have defiled people's genes with gene editing technology. Isaiah 28, verses 18 to 19. And your covenant with death shall be disannulled, and your agreement with hell shall not stand. When the overflowing scourge shall pass through, then ye shall be trodden down by it. From the time that it goeth forth it shall take you, for morning by morning shall it pass over, by day and by night, and it shall be a vexation, only to understand the report. Daniel 11, verse 30. For the ships of Kittim shall come against him. Therefore he shall be grieved and return, and have indignation against the holy covenant. So shall he do, he shall even return, and have intelligence with them that forsake the holy covenant. The ships of Kittim that the prophet Daniel refers to are the ships of the kings of the east. These are mainly the nations around the Tigris River and the Euphrates River on either side of the rivers. However, they are mostly those countries that you can locate east of the Euphrates River. Please refer to this map. You can see parts of countries located around the Euphrates-Tigris River systems like southern Iran, known in the Bible as Elam, Iraq, known in the Bible as Babylon, Turkey, known in the Bible as Asia Minor, Saudi Arabia, known in the Bible as Arabia, and even Syria, known in the Bible as Aram, but also Syria. Ezekiel 17, verse 16. As I live, saith Yahuwah Elohim, surely in the place where the king dwelleth that made him king, whose oath he despised, and whose covenant he brake, even with him in the midst of Babylon he shall die. In this video, Leeland Jones gives a detailed explanation of the kings of the east. Refer back to Daniel 11, verse 30, and the ships of Kittim. You can find this video link in the description section of today's video, along with all my other references. The video clip is under 3 minutes long, so please be patient.
And here you have dwelling at Jerusalem at the Feast of Pentecost. The people are there. They're hearing them in their own language. Okay, now what is the first language that's mentioned, the first few languages? Okay, we hear every man in our own tongue. Okay, so the people, that were devout, coming from the nations, they're in Jerusalem for the feast. Okay, Parthians, Medes, Elamites, and the dwellers of Mesopotamia. All right, now what we have here is basically the area of Iran, bordering into Iraq, areas around Babylon. So this is on either side or around the area of the Tigris River and the Euphrates River. That's where the people are coming from. So you can see in the prophecy, when the bowl is poured out, it dries the great river Euphrates. So here you can see the people living around on either side, but also on the east of the Euphrates. The Medes, the Elamites, the dwellers of Mesopotamia. in Judea. Okay, and then it lists some other places. All right, these are other places. These are other places. But we're going to focus on the ones east in this video. Okay, we can read some of the other ones. Cappadocia, Pontus, Asia, Phrygia, Pamphylia in Egypt, and parts of Libya, Cyrene, in Rome, Jews and proselytes, Cretes and Arabians. Okay, we do hear them speak in our tongues the wonderful works of God. And they were amazed, and they were doubt one to another. What does this mean? Okay, so it's apparent that these people, specifically from the Medes and the Elamites, is what we're going to focus on. Okay, because now we're going to do some history. We're going to have to go back and figure out how are these people hearing the works of God in their own language, in Jerusalem, devout ones. Why did the Most High point these places out? Why did he speak to them in their language? Well, they're the kings of the east, guys.
Revelation 16, verse 12. And the sixth angel poured out his vial upon the great river Euphrates, and the water thereof was dried up, that the way of the kings of the east might be prepared. Please watch this short video clip that discusses how much of the river Euphrates has already dried up. Keep in mind the kings of the east, and keep in mind Revelation 16, verse 12, and Daniel 11, verse 30.
The mighty Euphrates River used to near Khaled al-Hamis's farm. But now the river is only visible from a distance. The crops have been destroyed due to the lack of irrigation. Even worse, the farmer's family has been left without drinking water.
We are completely deprived of drinking water. The women have to walk 7 kilometers just to get a bucket of water for their children to drink.
Al-Hamis is among millions of Syrians who depend on West Asia's longest river, Euphrates. Water levels in the river have hit record lows. Neighboring Iraq has also been affected. Both Iraq and Syria have been dry countries. Despite this, the current drought is unprecedented. Rainfall has declined by 70%. Environmentalists are calling it the region's worst water crisis in years.
12 million people in Syria and Iraq are struggling with this, the worst water crisis in years that we have seen. So especially this is, the water table is at its lowest, 70% less rainfall, and this has really wide ramifications for health. It has wide ramifications because drinking water isn't safe.
The issue is not limited to drinking water shortage. Critical facilities like hospitals are at risk of facing power outages. This, as the drought is threatening to bring hydroelectric power plants to a halt.
Power shortages affect people's lives and forces them to use fuel oil. In addition, in the summer when it's hot, people need more electricity. With pumping stations and power generation stations out of service, hundreds of thousands of hectares of agricultural lands are affected, as well as the vegetable, maize and cotton seasons.
And activists warn that the situation is likely to worsen due to a lack of water resource management in the war-torn countries.
I was disappointed in Bibi just on a personal basis. When we have an election, that it was a rigged election, like a third world country election. I think it's a terrible personal trait. I haven't spoken to him since, right? I didn't talk to him. I thought he wanted to make a deal more than Netanyahu. And I will be honest, I had a great meeting with him, Abbas, right? I had a great meeting with him, and we spent a lot of time together, talked about many things, and it was almost like a father. I mean, he was so nice. Couldn't have been nicer. And after meeting with Bibi for 3 minutes, I looked at him and said, "You don't want to make a deal, do you?" And he said, Well, and the fact is, I don't think Bibi ever wanted to make a deal.
Why?
I thought the Palestinians were impossible, and the Israelis would do anything to make peace and a deal. I found that not to be true.
Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu no longer allies, at least not now. The former president confirming he doesn't even speak to the former Israeli prime minister, adding, F him. Trump goes on to say, the first person that congratulated Biden was Bibi Netanyahu, the man that I did more for than any other person I dealt with. He has made a terrible mistake. I want to bring in Barak Ravid, Middle East correspondent for Axios. He joins us live from Tel Aviv. Barak, thank you for being with us. I'm not sure I explained this as clearly as I could here. You've broken reporting as part of a new book coming out, and it was out in Axios overnight, that to me is really interesting, which is that former President Trump is livid at Benjamin Netanyahu. He isn't talking to him. He's pissed. He said, F him. Why? All because Netanyahu dared to congratulate Joe Biden on his election victory. Why don't you explain to us what you learned?
Yes, hi, good morning. So, as you said, I interviewed Trump twice, once in April and second time in July as part of my work on my book that just came out here in Israel, Trump's Peace, the Abraham Accords and Reshaping of the Middle East. And what was interesting in this interview is that it broke the myth that there was this bromance between Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu. And this was a myth that both politicians cultivated for their own domestic politics. Netanyahu, I don't know if you remember, even during the election campaigns, put up those huge billboards with him and Trump standing next to each other with the headline "From a Different League." This was his, calling card as a politician, his relationship with Trump. And as you were surprised in the US, just imagine what people here in Israel thought. Because until today, everybody thought they were best friends, no daylight between them. And from now on, it's clear that this was bullshit.
A technical term there, I think you could say, Barak. But look, clinical. It's not like clinical. Yes, it's not like Netanyahu congratulated him right away. He waited a little while. Definitely. And I also wonder what you think about the fact that, this sort of shows with Donald Trump how much personalities, obviously, he valued here, but also his view of, whether Netanyahu has to acknowledge America as a nation, not just acknowledge America if Donald Trump is in charge.
Yeah, I think this was one of Netanyahu's biggest mistakes because Bibi put all of his chips on Donald Trump and basically took Israel from the position that it was a bipartisan issue that both Republicans and Democrats supported. And during those 4 years of Trump, Israel became a partisan issue. And I think that what we see today with those quotes coming out, it is clear how big of a mistake Netanyahu has made. But I want to tell you another thing. What Trump says about Netanyahu and the fact that he congratulated Biden, and it's obvious that, Bibi didn't have any other choice. It's not done that you don't congratulate the elected president of the United States. But I think that the fallout between them, and my book reveals this quite extensively, was wider because this was just what broke the camel's back. Mm-hmm. Trump felt that Netanyahu, over his last year of his presidency, he felt that Netanyahu was ungrateful, disloyal, that he didn't really want peace with the Palestinians, and that he used him on Iran. And all of those things are going to be revealed in the coming days with more excerpts from my book published on Axios. And by the way, this upcoming Monday, we will release a two-part podcast on Axios, how it happened, Trump's big deal, with many, many, many more details of the fallout between Netanyahu and Trump over the Abraham Accords, Iran, and many other issues. So it's not just Bibi congratulating Biden. This was the end. During the last year of Trump and even before, there were many, many things that were hidden under the table because it was important for both Trump and Netanyahu to show that there's no daylight And now we see that there was quite a lot of daylight.
And now they're not even talking, or at least they weren't the last time you spoke to him. And I have to say, this is all news to us. All of it is something that I was certainly not aware of before this came out overnight. I was struck, though, and I know you say it's only a part of the story, the end of the story, but Trump went so far as to tell you, Putin waited, Bolsonaro waited to congratulate Biden or acknowledge the victory. Why couldn't Netanyahu? It's really interesting who Trump is referring to there in the company he's trying to put Netanyahu with.
Exactly, because it shows where he puts Netanyahu, in which category of leaders around the world. But Trump said something even more interesting. He basically admitted that during his presidency, he took decisions that helped Netanyahu in his elections. When Netanyahu was trailing in the polls before the April 2019 elections, Trump took a decision to recognize the Golan Heights, the controversial area in northern Israel that was occupied from Syria in 1967, to recognize it as part of Israel. And Trump told me that after doing this, Netanyahu went up in the polls, and he said, if I haven't done that, he would lose the elections. So in Trump's mind, when he took this decision, it was also, there were other reasons, but one of the reasons was to help Netanyahu in the elections. And I think that this is why Trump felt so betrayed when Netanyahu didn't do the same for him.
Yeah, again, but it's at a personal level, not a global level. It doesn't matter. Getting peace here, peace there, doing the right thing doesn't appear to be what Trump cared about most. It's doing what benefits him personally that seemed to be driving all this.
Now for the final part of today's video, the mirrored Leeland Jones video called Indignation Against Covenant, Oath Despised. Thank you for your patience.
Guys, we have another major prophecy fulfilled, proving once again Donald Trump is the Antichrist. The Antichrist would make a peace deal with the king of Jerusalem, which you see here. The king of Babylon makes a covenant with the king of Jerusalem. You can read about that in Ezekiel chapter 17. And then it says the king of Babylon despises the oath. Okay, and he breaks the covenant. So the covenant is between the two men. Okay, now Daniel chapter 11 says he will have indignation against the holy covenant. So Donald Trump has fulfilled this perfectly by cursing Benjamin Netanyahu, because Benjamin Netanyahu congratulated Joe Biden, and Donald Trump got angry and did an interview with Barak Ravid of Axios. And in his book on Abraham Accords, Barak Ravid interviewed Donald Trump, and he said, F him for announcing Joe Biden's victory. He said, I haven't spoken to him since. F him. Cursing and blaspheming, just like the prophecy said, he would have indignation against the covenant. Now, he would also have to have indignation against Israel as well, which he also did in the new revealed information in Barak Ravid's book, and in these excerpts and audio clips on Axios, which we're going to look at. Okay, so this is fulfilling Daniel chapter 11, verse 28. He will have indignation against the holy covenant. Now, let's take a look at what came about in the articles on Axios to see the prophecy being fulfilled. Okay, in the series of articles, the first one we have is Introducing How It Happened, Season 3, Trump's Big Deal. So Jonathan Swan is interviewing Barak Ravid, and he asks him these questions, and this is when they release this information. Trump blasts Netanyahu for disloyalty. F him. So with exclusive reporting, Swan and Axios, Barak Ravid go behind the scenes in the gripping, chaotic events that lead to the Abraham Accords and the deal between Israel and 4 Arab states that are changing the Middle East. Okay, so this article was released, as you can see here, December 11, 2021. And then on a series of other releases, December 13th, Trump big deal, may your house be destroyed. In this episode, Middle East correspondent Barak Ravid, national security correspondent John Esfant explore the dramatic events of the deal of the century. Now, obviously, the deal was not between the Israelis and the Palestinians. Okay, so in this exclusive interview, Trump tells Barak the former Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu bears much of the blame. He also reveals their supposed bromance over saying of Netanyahu, F him. So this is part 2, and what you can do is you can listen to the interview. We'll play some excerpts for you, okay, of what was stated so you can hear it from his own mouth. So that was December 13th. And then we have another post here, December 13th, the secret alliance to the Abraham Accords. It says something similar, okay? But now let's take a look at the details of what happened in these interviews with Trump. Okay, in this one, December 10th, Trump blasts Netanyahu for disloyalty. Okay, this is the big one. This is what was released. This is what stirred up the whole world. Netanyahu, who are the closest of political allies, doing their 4 years, overlapping in office, at least to the public. Not anymore. I haven't spoken to him since. Trump said of the former prime minister, F him. What he's saying, Trump repeatedly criticized Netanyahu during 2 interviews for my book, Trump's Peace, the Abraham Accords, and the Reshaping of the Middle East. The final straw for Trump was when Netanyahu congratulated President-elect Biden for his election victory, while Trump was still disputing the result. The first person that congratulated Biden was Bibi, the man that I did so much for. Any other person I dealt with, Bibi could have stayed quiet. He has made a terrible mistake, quoting Donald Trump. Why it matters. Now, opposition leader Netanyahu is waging a continuous campaign to win back the prime minister's office while on trial for corruption. One of his primary political calling cards was his close relations with key U.S. politicians. One man in particular who remains highly popular in Israel is Trump. Okay, so Netanyahu's trying to keep his political face going, but now he's losing his calling card. My interview with Trump will feature a new season on Axios called How It Happened podcast, which we're showing you. Big picture. Domestic political reasons. Okay. Now, both Trump and Netanyahu cultivated a public perception that there was no daylight between them and then they worked closely together on key issues. By the end of the presidency, Trump had concluded that Netanyahu didn't really want peace with the Palestinians and was using him on Iran. Trump also felt that he'd helped ensure Netanyahu's political survival, but didn't get the same in return. He positively fumed about the video in which Netanyahu congratulated Biden. I liked Bibi. I still like Bibi, but I also like loyalty. The first person to congratulate Biden was Bibi. Not only did he congratulate him, he did it on tape. Trump told me, referring to Netanyahu. Reality check. Netanyahu was far from the first world leader to congratulate Biden. In fact, he waited more than 12 hours after the U.S. network called the elections, but Trump claimed he was shocked. When his wife Melania shared Netanyahu's video, he was very early, like the earliest and most. I haven't spoke to him since. F him. So then he goes on to talk about how Putin and Bolsonaro waited longer, but Bibi announced. So Trump was so upset about disloyalty, about everything he did for Netanyahu, everything he did for Israel. He's cursing and blaspheming Netanyahu. He's railing against Israel. Even the media in Israel is stating that he is anti-Semitic. Amazing. So he's going on and on here behind the scene. These remarks came during a 90-minute face-to-face interview in Mar-a-Lago, during which Trump repeatedly contended that he'd done so much more for Israel, for Netanyahu, than any other president. He cited decisions from withdrawing from the Iran deal, to moving the U.S. embassy, to keep troops in the region, recognize the Golan Heights in Israel. He noted he announced the Golan Heights move right before the election in April 2019. And when Netanyahu had been trailing in the polls, he would have lost the election if it wasn't for me. So Trump feels betrayed because he moved the Golan Heights in a political move to help Bibi, and it helped him stay in this sequence of elections. So Trump was very angry, and he said this is disloyalty. And he railed against Bibi. 18 months later, when Trump held an on-camera call with Netanyahu 10 days before the U.S. election to sign between Israel and Sudan, Trump asked Bibi whether Sleepy Joe could have cut such a deal. Mr. President, one thing I can tell you is we appreciate the help from the peace in America, Netanyahu cautiously, and Trump bristled. There were more substantial disagreements between Trump and Netanyahu over Iran, Netanyahu's plan to annex the West Bank, and Trump's desire for peace with the Palestinians. Even he criticized Netanyahu. Trump expressed some admiration for him as a politician, but also showed great interest in Netanyahu's legal troubles, though he said he'd never discussed them with Netanyahu himself. Okay. Now, just to keep this short, guys, basically Trump felt betrayed because Bibi congratulated Biden, okay, and he just basically just lost his mind, okay. So once that happened, he did this in this interview. Now, this was in April of 2021. Then he had a second interview with him in July, okay. So that's just this year. But he released this information during Hanukkah. He announced this to the world, December 10th, which is during Hanukkah. Very, very significant for us, okay? And so this is all the political things that they're stating, going back and forth. Now, I'm going to summarize a little bit of what if you watch the interviews, you'll hear this. But basically what happened is Bibi was annexing, and Trump didn't want him to annex the West Bank. So in order to stop Bibi from annexing, they announced the Abraham Accords. Now, of course, the Abraham Accords are also prophesied with the covenant with many, okay? So it had to be. Now, for Bibi's part, he felt that within the language of the peace deal that Trump released, he could annex, okay? But Trump didn't want him to annex the West Bank, all right? So then Trump spoke to, or the team, Jared Kushner and them, they spoke to the UAE dignitary, and he wanted to make ties with Israel. So the team with Trump went to Bibi and said, look, you have a choice. It's either annex or make ties with the Arab nations. And he wanted both. But then the team said, no, you don't have a choice. You have to do what we know now is the Abraham Accords. You have to make ties with the Arab nations, okay? But Trump had to do that because of a dispute in this peace deal. This is the peace deal when they're meeting right here, okay? So this is the covenant, and now Trump is railing against the covenant, guys. This is amazing. This is exactly what the prophecy says. Every prophecy teacher will tell you the Antichrist will make a covenant with Israel, and then he would have indignation against the covenant. He would despise it. Now, in another article, Barak Ravid also revealed Trump felt used on the Soleimani strike. He says Israel did not do the right thing. So now the Antichrist would not only rail against Zedekiah, okay, the Zedekiah figure, he would also blast Israel. So again, December 15th, 2021, Trump felt betrayed by Israel. The assassination of Iranian commander Qasem Soleimani in January 2020 seemed like the height of the U.S.-Israel cooperation, but actually became a major point of tension between the allies. Behind the scenes, Trump expected Israel to play a more active role in the attack. And he griped that then Prime Minister Bibi was willing to fight Iran to the last American soldier. According to former senior Trump official, Trump himself told me Israel did not do the right thing. So now the Antichrist is also complaining about Israel. Trump made that remark in an interview last July for my book, Trump's Peace Deal, Abraham Accords, Reshaping the Middle East. Okay, it was in July, just like we told you. I can't talk about this story, but I was very disappointed in Israel having to do with that event. People will be hearing about that at the right time, Trump said. Between the lines, it's unclear if Trump's anger is entirely justified. A senior Israeli defense official told me that Israel proposed a more active role for the Israeli forces, but the U.S. insisted on being the ones to execute the strike. Israel also provided the U.S. with key intelligence report tracking Soleimani's cell phone. So Israel tracked the cell phone, U.S. did the strike. A former U.S. official said Trump's anger wasn't totally warranted. All right. But what he put the episode into that same box that he put in his feelings for NATO and the allies wanting the U.S. to do the fighting for them. Warranted or not, the episode stuck with Trump during his last year in office. And you tried to pull Trump aside to make amends when he visited the White House in September 2020 for signing the Abraham Accords, but Trump wasn't convinced and continued to believe Netanyahu had used them. The former White House official told me. Flashback. January 3rd, 2020, Soleimani, the commander of Iran's regional network of proxies, international, arrived in Baghdad. Okay, so now they rehearsed the strike, okay? But again, Trump blasts Netanyahu for disloyalty. F him. Okay? Trump says Netanyahu never wanted peace with the Palestinians. Okay? Netanyahu's cold feet almost killed the Abraham Accords. And here you can see the title, Trump, the Antichrist, would also speak against Israel. Trump felt used on Soleimani strike. Israel did not do the right thing. Now, this is a post that, as you can see, we made in July 30th, 2021. And Johnny Storm, Don't Speak News, posted this on his blog. Title is Partial Timeline of Bible Prophecy Part 2, Summary of Daniel 8 and 11. So we did a breakdown in Daniel 11 on how Trump perfectly fulfills the Antichrist. Okay, so if you don't know this, let's go through all the prophecies that have been fulfilled. Let's start off with today, okay? And then we're going to go through all the other prophecy he's fulfilled in Daniel 11. Now, I'll provide a link to that blog post so you can see it, but this is the original of the blog post, and I just added this today. And his heart shall be against the holy covenant. He shall be grieved in return and have indignation against the holy covenant. So shall he do. So this is in Daniel chapter 11. That's verse 28 and 30. So definitely get this. I'll put this in a blog post so you can get this, keep this information, do a study. And this is proof Trump is the Antichrist. Now, in the order of events, in verse 45, he shall plant his tabernacles of his palace between the seas and the glorious mountain. So this is the U.S. embassy being moved from Tel Aviv, okay, which was the sea, the Mediterranean Sea, on Tel Aviv and the glorious mountain, which is Jerusalem. So Trump announced the move of the U.S. embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem in Hanukkah 2017, okay, prophecy fulfilled. And in his estate, he shall be a vile person, okay? Because he's a vile person, that's why he's going to say things like he did, F him. He's a vile person, just like it says in verse 21, okay? He'll stand up a vile person, which will not give honor to the kingdom, okay? And Trump here is talking about he will come in peaceably and obtain the kingdom by flatteries, okay? So this is the peace deal. Peaceably here is prosperity. Sawa in Hebrew. Thus the title of Trump's The Antichrist Deal of the Century is Peace and Prosperity. Trump obviously is a vile person who voted, who was voted in on the evangelical vote by flatteries, okay? But he's a vile person and he's going to curse and blaspheme. And after he had a league with them that he worked deceitfully, came up and he became strong with many people. He shall enter peaceably in prosperity, Sawa in Hebrew. Again, after the agreement or league was made with the Zionists on the contents of the peace deal. So really the Jews wrote the peace deal. That's why Netanyahu went to annex. Trump works deceitfully to gain approval of the evangelical leaders in support of Israel and the peace and prosperity deal. Thus, the small people being the Zionists and evangelical leaders on the Trump team. Okay? So that's in verse 23. Verse 24, he shall do what his fathers have not done, nor his fathers' fathers. Meaning, he accomplishes the peace deal no other U.S. president made. Okay? So Trump accomplishes that peace deal. And his heart shall be against the holy covenant. All right? And this is what we're saying is the holy covenant. The covenant he did was to divide the land. He'd be against Christ, okay? And now what we're seeing is we're seeing him actually go against the covenant, all right? So it had to do with going against the scripture of truth, okay? In the deal of the century, it will be corrupt by flatteries, and he cast down the truth to the ground of practice and prospered. He'll destroy and corrupt wonderfully, all right? But now what we have okay, the mighty and holy people. But now what we have is him actually being against the Holy Covenant and having indignation. All right. So that is fulfilled with Trump's blasting Benjamin Netanyahu and the state of Israel. They shall pollute the sanctuary fortress and take away the daily sacrifice, okay, and place the abomination that makes desolate. Okay, so we saw the abomination of desolation fulfilled. The daily sacrifice had been taken away. Okay, for time's sake, this is all here. This is all review things we talked about before. Now, this is the part that we're waiting to see. He will exalt himself, okay, but the only thing really left for him to do is to go into the third temple. And he will cause them that rule over many, and they shall divide the land again. Okay, well, dividing the land again is giving the Golan Heights and East Jerusalem, okay, provisions in the peace deal. And he shall confirm the covenant with many. That is the Abraham Accords. He shall stretch forth also in the countries of Egypt. All right, and the treasuries, okay, with Egypt and Libyans or Morocco and the Ethiopians and Sudan. So these are the nations that is part of the covenant with many and the Abraham Accords, the Muslim nations that made agreements with Israel, UAE, Bahrain, Sudan, and Morocco. It is also combining the gods of three major religions called the Abrahamic faiths, okay? So as you can see, the Antichrist accomplished most of the prophecies revealing by after August 2019. He shall speak great words and blasphemy against the Most High and the saints of the Most High and change the times and laws. And they'll give him his hand for a time dividing a time. Okay? So he also, as a Nebuchadnezzar experience like Daniel 4, would have his dominion taken, but the judgment will set and take away his dominion and construe it, destroy it to an end. So this is when he lost the election. All right? So therefore, the only major prophecy left to be fulfilled relates to the third temple, so that he sits as God in the temple of God, showing himself as God. He fulfilled all the other prophecies. Now, I'll provide links to the article and blog post that we mentioned in July 30th. And again, you can see this is time is short. We're now at part 2 of the Biblical Timeline series. This time, Leeland Jones went into a short summary of Daniel 8 and 11, which begins below. So we'll provide links to this, okay? I'll post this on my blog, and I'll also link it to Johnny's blog. But we are stating clearly, indignation against the covenant, the oath despised. Now, further details, we do have a playlist on the peace deal. Obviously, this is a playlist. Donald Trump is the Antichrist. Further proof and evidence of prophecy being fulfilled perfectly. The oath despised, guys, we've talked about it before. It's Ezekiel 17. Okay, to make it clear, this was the peace deal, and now the Antichrist is turning against Israel. Okay, turning against Israel, turning against the king of Jerusalem in Ezekiel 17, blaspheming, cursing as a vile person. This is the prophecy being fulfilled. Thanks for watching. Okay, now if you're not familiar with Trump as the Antichrist, we do have a proof in the playlist. Trump is the Antichrist. We'll have links to that showcase on Vimeo. Okay, you can also find that on YouTube. Thanks for watching, and God bless you.